Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes. I can see a few people trying to log in and we can get started shortly. Hello, once again. I'm Pranshu. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I think we can get started now. I hope you're all well and keeping safe. I will quickly introduce WalkingTree to anyone joining us for the very first time. WalkingTree Technologies is a technology-focused company that specializes in providing modern software development and processes. We focus on using agile methodologies to build innovative, modern, and cutting-edge technical solutions. Founded in 2012, our team is composed of industry experts with long-standing experience in application and software development. We help our clients in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, India, and build new applications, transform existing applications, scale up existing development teams, or work to provide operations and support. We advise and design, build modern software with cloud technology. So if you're looking for a cloud migration strategy and need freshly built infrastructure or already have one and are looking for improvements, WalkingTree is always here to help. On to our speakers of the day. Scott Seabolt is a business-focused principal solutions architect with over 30 years of experience in engineering enterprise computing systems. These include many years of cloud computing experience with public and private cloud architectures. He's also worked in all phases of the software development lifecycle, including product ideation, design, development, testing, implementation, and operation support. Here at WalkingTree is also helping our clients bootstrap their AWS strategy for accelerated global growth. We also have Abhilasha Sinha with us. Abhilasha has a total experience of 18 years and a core strength lies in designing and building complex cross-platform applications using Angular, React, and Flutter. She also comes with significant experience in cloud financial operations and specific expertise in cloud cost optimization. Abhilasha has also been working with our clients to leverage the AWS platform to enable them to solve business challenges, to scale and succeed globally. That was about us and our speakers. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, thank you, Pranshu. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to discuss some various topics around cost optimization. Specifically, we want to discuss how we can optimize AWS cost without compromising your performance and availability. And there's several factors obviously that go into that. So we'll kind of deep dive into those. We'll start out today by talking about the AWS Well-Architected Framework, and then we'll go into cost optimization best practices, and then some practical ways to achieve that cost optimization. And then my counterpart, Abhilasha, will talk about the cost optimization intelligence strategy. So in other words, we've looked at some best practices, looked at some practical ways to do it, and then she'll kind of put it together for us to come up with a plan and how we can strategize to do that. And then she'll kind of summarize how to look for common mistakes, and we'll give you some practical examples of the mistakes we've made even. So we'll get into that. And then lastly, we'll end with discussing some of the AWS cost management services that are out there. All right, so with that, let's dig into the AWS Well-Architected Framework. And if you've never seen this, this is really, it all started with a white paper written several years ago. And it's really turned into just a fantastic framework that you can use to help guide you through designing and maintaining your cloud platform. And it's specific to AWS, but a lot of the principles I would say would apply to either GCP or Microsoft Azure. So some really good foundation that'll be available to you through this framework. Well, what is it? What is AWS Framework? Well, it provides architectural best practices across the 5 pillars, and we'll discuss each of those. And it's used for designing and operating reliable, secure, efficient, and cost-effective systems in the cloud. The framework really provides a set of questions that allows you to review an existing or proposed architecture. Okay, so the first pillar is operation excellence. This pillar focuses on running, monitoring, and improving systems and processes to deliver business value. And it also addresses automating changes, how you respond to events, defining standards to manage your daily operations. And that's really what it's all about, is it's how you operationally impact and gain operational excellence in operating your cloud platform. Okay, and then the next pillar is security pillar, and kind of like the name implies, the security pillar focuses on protecting information and systems. And it really does, it empowers confidentiality and integrity of your data, also how you do privilege management, protect your systems, and then helps you establish controls to detect security events should they arise. So, and nowadays it's almost like it's not even a should, it's kind of a when. So the next pillar is reliability, and as the name implies, the reliability pillar focuses on ensuring a workload performs its intended function correctly and consistently as you might expect it to. All right, you'll hear the word workload mentioned quite a bit during this webinar. And so kind of get used to that. If we repeat that word, just bear with us, but it's being done for a reason. So you want to know your workload, okay? And in that reliability pillar, it kind of walks you through on how to make your workload resilient so that it recovers quickly from failures. The pillar also addresses, distributed system design. So doing recovery planning and how to handle change. All right, moving forward. Moving forward, we have the performance pillar. So that's our 4th pillar that we'll talk about out of the 5. And the performance pillar is a pillar that focuses on using IT and computing resources efficiently. With cloud, it's very easy on any cloud to go out and just provision a resource. But knowing how to do it efficiently and making sure you're not only gaining the highest performance you can, but also making sure that you have the right resources to do the job you need. So don't over provision things either. In this pillar, it talks about how your business needs evolve, and it helps you select, again, the right resource type and sizes based on your workload requirements. And then it talks about how you can monitor that performance, and then, how can you use all that information to make informed decisions to maintain your efficiency, as your business needs grow. Okay, and the last pillar here, the 5th pillar, is the cost optimization pillar. This is the one we're going to focus on a lot today. And that pillar really is focused on avoiding unnecessary costs, but I might also add how do you use your cost efficiently? Okay, it helps you avoid overspending while still meeting your business need by understanding and controlling where your money's being spent. Okay, so selecting the most appropriate and the right number of resource types, and then being able to analyze your spend over time and to be able to scale. All right, well, the first thing we'll hit at a high level here is really some of the most common best practices out there, right? So first thing is, and you'll probably hear these somewhat repeated, but it's always worth repeating because right sizing your compute resources and doing it proactively. So constantly looking at the system, making sure that you're right sized in your compute resources, because compute resource is probably going to be one of your highest cost items in your cloud infrastructure. Then choosing the right storage type. So even within Amazon S3 or EBS storage, but if you look at Amazon S3, there's Amazon S3 standard, there's S3 infrequent access, there's S3 Glacier, so and other long-term storage as well. So so making sure that you choose the right type is, I would say, is analogous. So when we talk about a workload for your compute resources, also knowing what information you're storing, how much and how frequently it's being accessed are things you're going to want to know. And then monitor and correct cost anomalies. And I have an extreme example of this, but it's appropriate. And years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I had a small business I was working with, and they had ran into a situation where they called me up and said, "Hey, we just found out we had our cost just went, astronomical." Well, I figured, okay, it went up $100 or something. Well, the normal spend they had was $100, and they just happened to be monitoring, or not monitoring, but going in and looking at their billing one day. By the way, using their root account in the console and the same login and password they used for their Amazon retail account. So their account was hacked. Well, a few years ago, there was a big event that really slowed down the internet across the globe. And in their particular case, they weren't the only ones, but in their case, they went from $100 a month to a spend of $70,000 within a couple of weeks. And what had happened, someone hacked their account. They went in, they look, and all of a sudden they find over 300 extra large instances of EC2 spun up, among other things. So there were VPCs all over the place. It was just a nightmare. So the great thing about it was an anomaly. They caught it, and we were able to work through some of their issues, not using their root account in the console, but also cleaning up a lot of those resources and putting some monitoring in there for them. So they were able to get that corrected. Amazon was great about it, but that may not always be the case, right? It may not be $70,000. Maybe you're seeing a spend of $50 or $100 extra a month, and just maybe you had a team that forgot to tell you that they just went out and spun up a new environment and for research and forgot to shut it down, forgot to clean it up. So monitoring and looking for those cost anomalies is important. Build a culture of cost awareness. You'll hear myself, and then especially when Abhilasha speaks, she's going to talk about building a culture of cost awareness from the time you design to your operational period in production, right? So just developing a cost awareness within your organizations. You can also purchase instances using savings plans and reserved instances. We'll deep dive into that more in a sec. And then automating infrastructure right sizing during provisioning. So, meaning, using CloudFormation, using Terraform or Polemy or one of the tools, right, to automate your infrastructure deployment and sizing. That way you avoid some of those costs or some of those mistakes you might make during provisioning. Okay, next, let's talk about beyond best practices. Let's talk about some practical ways. I'm not going to go through this list. I'm going to deep dive into each of these bullets, but I'm going to give you, these, roughly 8 different areas to look at to help you and give you some practical ways that you can optimize your costs in AWS. And again, a lot of these principles still apply for any cloud, okay? All right, so first one is shut down unutilized resources. All right, so what you want to do here is you want to look for idle time for your resources. Maybe you got several hours where you're running EC2 instances that are idle. Well, you can go look at that in several ways. You can look at the EC2 console itself and look at the individual EC2 instances in the monitoring tab, or you can go pull a usage report and take a look at it there. Again, having a good tagging strategy is going to help with that too, because you can identify environments or functionality. So what's the first thing we do in this? Pull a report, look at your instances that are not running, and stop or pause those resources you identified that you're not utilizing. So, maybe your developers, your testers, your researchers, your business folks who do UAT, maybe they go home at 6 or 7 p.m. I guess that's optimistic, right? But maybe they do. So you've got hours where those environments, those resources are not being used. Well, the beautiful thing about cloud is just shut it down or pause it, right? So identify those resources and stop or pause them when you're not using them. One way you can automate that is by using the AWS Instance Scheduler. So you can automatically shut those resources down during the hours they're not going to be used. And that way you don't have to think about it. You don't have to assign a resource to say, okay, environment management, every day at 7 p.m. I need someone to shut all these down. Now you can schedule that with a resource instance scheduler. All right, so the third action that I would encourage you to look at is look at resources. And I'll give you an example. An example of this is like Redshift clusters. Redshift clusters are great, but they're also expensive to operate. And I know we've had clients who they don't pull data from those Redshift clusters every hour of every day. It may be that they run them daily, or they run them weekly or monthly even to pull reports. Well, you can pause those clusters when they're not being utilized to save a lot on your cost. Okay, so pausing resources like that, especially when the resources that can be quite expensive, like Redshift. All right, well, there's one thing to shut down unutilized resources, but what if you have resources that you can't shut down? They're just flat being underutilized, okay? So maybe you need to look at your sizing on your resources. Okay, so you can go pull reports. You can look at EC2 console. You can pull a usage report to see what's happening with those different resources you got provisioned. And then you can go into this AWS cost optimizer, and you can look at that usage for the resource, and it allows you to do what if scenarios. All right, so first thing you can do, again, is identify and really, again, go in, save money by understanding resource utilization and the amount of workload on those resources, right? So go into cost, look at underutilized resources, go into Cost Explorer. Maybe you've got an extra large instance out there. Maybe when you first provisioned this thing, you thought, boy, we're just going to have all this traffic, right? So I'm just going to go on the principle of bigger is better. Well, bigger is also more expensive. So maybe you need to look at that through Cost Optimizer. Maybe you don't need an extra large. Maybe you need to do a what if scenario and discover that, hey, when I plug a medium instance in here, I'm up to 50% utilization or 70% utilization, whatever the case might be. Whatever is a better utilization on that size instance can save you a lot of money. And again, the other action you can take is just making sure that you got a good tagging strategy. And I can't emphasize that enough. When you provision a resource, make sure you tag it either by functionality or you tag it by environment. And also when you're using either CloudFormation or Terraform or one of those tools to automate this, you can kind of set that up so that it's automatic as well. So, but the key is get a good tagging strategy. Okay, so we've talked about shutting down unutilized resources. Now we talked about sizing undersized resources. And the next item that we'll look at is just, this is a screen. Actually, this is when I mentioned looking at your usage on your EC2 instance. This is actually the monitoring dashboard for an EC2 instance. Now, in this example, it's not really for a long period of time, right? So not really enough to gauge, but just to give you an idea of the visual of what you can look at. So looking at CPU utilization, maybe you look at this over the course of a month instead of just an hour or 45 minutes, right? But look at it and see what periods of the day don't you use it? Or maybe it's just flat out being underutilized. So that's one of the tools on top of the usage reports as well that you can look at. Well, the next item that we'll talk about in terms of cost optimization is using a reserve instance for workloads. And specifically, this is, again, knowing your workload. So workloads having a consistent use, maybe EC2 reserve instance would be a good fit for you. So what is a reserved instance? Just like the name implies, if you know you're gonna have a consistent usage, go out and reserve that capacity. And what that means is, hey, you're gonna pay up front. You're gonna pay some amount up front, but your cost per minute over that time that you actually use it is going to be a great deal less, and could be up to 72% less than an on-demand instance. So kind of that pay-as-you-go pricing, right? And by the way, those can be reserved in 1 to 3 year increments. So you can reserve that capacity 1 to 3 years. Obviously, 1 year being is going to be at a less cost initially than a 3 year, but then your percentage or your cost per minute is going to be higher for 1 year than it is a 3 year. But either one is going to give you good cost savings. Okay, well, the other thing you can do is use what's called a spot instance. Now, spot instances are great, right? Because when we look at those, we think, wow, those instances are up to like a 90% discount. And that's great. That is really great if your workload is stateless, or if it's fault tolerant, maybe it's flexible like big data, maybe it's a containerized workload, or you're doing CI/CD, or it's a web server, maybe it's a dev or test environment where you can stand to lose that instance. Because the caveat with a spot instance is the reason it's even available to you is because it's an unused resource, right? So the cloud provider looks at that and says, well, I have unused resources. Tell you what, if you just want to pop up an instance, you can use that, but if I need it, then I'm going to take it with relatively short notice. So that's why, again, maybe this is not a good fit for workloads that have consistent use, but it might be a good fit if you have a stateless or a very fault-tolerant usage, or fault-tolerant workload for that instance. All right. The next thing you can do is you can configure autoscaling, and autoscaling is a great solution design paradigm. And what that means is that for example, your EC2 autoscaling, it allows those EC2 solutions to expand and shrink on demand, right? So maybe you're only busy certain hours of the day. Maybe you just need to really ramp up when it's holiday season. I know a few years ago, not even a few, maybe a year or two ago, now my kids are crazy about Legos. And they buy Legos with every dime they ever get. Well, when a new one comes out, or it's time for Christmas, and I think this was the case where there was a new one coming out years ago, and we'd go on to the website and try to order. We couldn't order because it was so busy it shut the thing down. Well, they've since changed that, right? Now they've got some good infrastructure running on AWS, and it's elastic, but you think about that in terms of, hey, I don't always need this, so I really just want to have it when I need it. So kind of only pay for what you use. And with this paradigm, you can still maintain your performance targets and that's set by your business, right? So, and tools that are out there to look at that. Maybe you've got your auto scaling set up and you just need to make sure it's working right. Well, you can use a couple of tools on that. You can use the described scaling activity CLI, or you could also look at the auto scaling console. All right, so auto scaling, again, is a very good paradigm. And I would add too that I haven't addressed on here, but a containerized environment's really good as well. So we can reap some of those same benefits. All right, so boy, this is one that that I don't always like because it requires some planning, right? But even at home, we set up budgets, hopefully. So setting up a budget, right, just means, hey, we're going to create buckets. And then we're going to allocate resources to put in those buckets. And maybe you divide it up into things like teams, right? And within the budgeting tool within AWS, you can set up cost categories. And again, maybe that's teams. So maybe you got an alpha, a beta team, a FinOps team. You can go allocate resources, those costs. You can go allocate cost into those different resources for budgeting purpose. And that also gives the different teams a way to look at their actual spend, right? So, hey, what do I have to spend and how much have I spent? So it just gives you a good way to monitor that and empower your teams. And I believe Abelesha will also go into some of that when she talks about the tagging strategies, but also about building that cost culture, right? Is to kind of distribute, so you don't just have one group or one individual managing it all. You kind of put some power back into your teams. All right, so but budgeting is a very important thing. Budget and allocate your resources. Okay, next area, well, choose the right compute resource. We've talked about this, or the right service, right? That's great. We've talked about that a little bit, but again, I'm going to go back and hit it again and talk about workloads, right? So it's important to understand your workload and understanding it in terms that provide proper functionality and performance, but also in terms of cost efficiency. So cloud resources are easy to spin up, but you want to develop that culture so that not only are you getting functionality, system performance, but also cost efficiency as well. And that well-architected framework will allow you to develop a well-architected workload that uses the most effective cost strategy, as well as using those resources properly. And it can really provide a significant and positive economic impact to your organization. All right, the other thing you can look at too is look at a serverless paradigm. Serverless is, it's just a great, just really fancy topic to think about. And I love serverless, right? I love looking at doing things with Lambda, for example. What a great paradigm that is, because what does it do? It really abstracts you from having to manage operating systems and those underlying details in that environment. And that will save you a lot of money. So going serverless, really, it can save you 70 to 90%. But is it always the best, right? Is it always best for your usage? So it's, again, knowing your application, knowing your workload, and knowing what functionality you need. The other thing is we did a little study a couple of months ago on using Fargate for our containerization as opposed to using EC2 clusters. And when we looked at that concept is great, and it works really well. So Fargate works really well for your containerization, but deciding on the two is not always cut and dry, because Fargate is really, really cost effective when you're using a lower utilization percentage. But as you get up in a higher utilization percentage, actually EC2 is better. So when you have a constant higher percentage utilization, EC2 is actually more cost efficient than Fargate is. So it's not always cut and dry on whether you need to go serverless or not, but it is an option that you want to look at, especially in the cases where you want to where you're migrating to the cloud and deciding what to do. That's always a good point to look at. But even if your workloads are already running, you can always look at re-architecting. And so anyway, something to consider. Doesn't fit in every case, though. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. But so really choosing the right compute resource is a key principle in having a cost-effective strategy with the cloud. All right, the last area I'm going to hit before I turn it over to my counterpart, Abelesha, is checking your storage. So in this case, checking storage is great, but I mean, maybe if you're like me, I mean, I know if I even look, I've got a MacBook Pro, right? And I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive in that MacBook Pro. I'd hate to say that, I'm kind of, we in the US, we talk about practice what you preach. Can't always say that when it comes to my download folder. So it seems like I've got, unlimited storage. And then, in cloud especially, right? When we think about cloud resources, we think about Amazon S3, it's like boy, we've got infinite storage out there. It's relatively cheap. But hey, over time, it all adds up, right? So every time you store something, it just adds and adds. So a key here is to know what you're storing, know how often you're accessing it, right? And know how much and what the sizes are that you've got stored. And the tool to use to do that is you can look at the S3 analytics, right? And it will allow you not only to see how much and what you've got stored, but also your access patterns, right? How often do you access it? Maybe you only access certain stored objects out there once a month or once a year even. Well, maybe that doesn't need to go into the Amazon S3 standard storage. Maybe it's infrequent access, or maybe it's Glacier, one of the long-term storage options. So again, just like knowing your workload, knowing your storage, knowing what's out there and how frequently it's accessed is a key to optimize your costs. So because you can see a good bit of savings when you look at the different S3 storage tiers. Well, one thing you can do to help that, to automate it, is set up lifecycle policies. So maybe you're storing objects out there that, after 30 days, they're really never accessed, or they're accessed, once a year or something, or maybe they're accessed once a month, or whatever the case might be. Look at that and see if you can set up policies that will go out and after X amount of days or other parameters, right, will go out and move your objects to a cheaper store. Okay, so lifecycle policies are a good way to do that. Well, maybe you're like, well, I don't want to think about this. I don't have the resources to go try to do that planning. Well, there's also something called S3 intelligent tiering. So that allows S3 to automatically analyze and move objects to the appropriate storage tier. Now, there is some cost with that, but it's still far less than, having all your resources stored in a standard tier when they don't need to be. All right, so the next thing is, Amazon EBS storage. Well, EBS is great. Again, you provision it. But what you want to do is you want to go out and you want to look at those EBS volumes and make sure that you're using them. And one way to do that is to take maybe like a 7-day period, look at the usage, look at the activity. And if you see over that 7-day period, maybe you've got one IOP or less of activity, maybe you can just delete that. All right, maybe not, may not be able to, but it's something to look at. By the way, IOP, in case you don't know, right, that's input-output operations. So just looking at activity on the EBS volume. Maybe you can delete it. And if you're not sure, Amazon provides great tools to take snapshots of those. So again, it's knowing what's stored and what's on those volumes. So know your system, really. That's really kind of the key. All right, so that's going to kind of wrap up my portion of this webinar. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys listening. If I can ever help you out, look me up on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/Scott Seabolt, or reach out to WalkingTree. You can also find WalkingTree on LinkedIn or walkingtree.tech, or connect at walkingtree.tech. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to my esteemed colleague, Abhilesha, and she is going to walk us through cost optimization intelligence strategy. So Abhilesha, it's all yours.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody. So as Scott rightly mentioned, know your services well. So that is the key. With that in mind, we will look at having a strategy defined for the enterprise to be able to have the optimized cost. So in order to define a strategy, what are the four steps or 4 aspects to it? So we have to build a culture of cost awareness. provide visibility, make your insights actionable, and finally balance optimization with innovation and performance. So at the end of it, it is all about bringing the balance between optimization and the innovation and growth we want to bring at the enterprise level. And to bring that balance, we start with building a culture of cost awareness. So the cost awareness culture would come by having like your entire team having the power to build resources and not being centralized and like restricted approach. Instead of that, it's a more decentralized approach where naturally the teams working on specific resources are free to spin up the resources, but then you have proper guardrails around that so that they do not like it's not exceeding the budgets or the like costs you have in mind for each of these resources. So as a strategy, you would want to have this guardrails, which is provided by defining the service control policies. So in AWS organizations, if you have a proper structure of your organization, your OU, your accounts, your users and roles. So when you define your service control policy, so if you do it at the root level, it actually impacts all the OUs or all the accounts which are within that root. So you can, and the kind of policy, so these policies are defined in a JSON format, and you can like deny certain accesses, you can allow certain specific conditional accesses. So as you're giving your teams permission to, okay, anybody can spin up new resources, but then you place a guardrail that, okay, I would allow only maybe a nano or a micro or even a medium, but not large or extra large, so that there is some level of control established at that point. Additionally, you bring in the culture of accountability so that everybody is involved in the process and well versed that their actions are resulting in costs. So they have to be very vigilant in what they are creating. They have a reason for doing it, and they are keeping a watch on the cost as they spin up new resources. So once you bring in this culture of cost awareness, next you have to provide the visibility to your org structure, to your teams, to allow them to be able to see what the resources are leading to, what are the costs at the detail level. So one main important aspect which Scott also mentioned is having a proper tagging strategy. So when you are creating resources, you use the proper key value pairs, you follow the best practices, so that later on when you're trying to drill down and look at the cost, it is very clear. It all ties up to a tag, and then it is very easy to track and understand from where the cost is coming. Also make use of budgeting tools so that you can like bring in the control at this level also, so that at like different levels, you can set budgets, you can set budget actions. So bringing the visibility by showing dashboards and tags. And next is like when you're bringing the visibility and you're providing the insights, so it has to be actionable, like it has to make sense to the people. So if there is a anomaly, what are they supposed to do? If the costs are exceeding, okay, let them shut down the instances which were just spun for testing, or are they using the right instances? Like, can spot instances be used for development and testing so that we can have cost savings there? Then the dashboards also should be designed in such a way that it makes sense to the role or the teams which are like accessing. So you show them exactly what impacts them or what they are concerned with, so that they know what is important and what they need to do. Also, the insights which you provide, that should also make sense, whether it is a negative indicator or a positive indicator, so that it helps them to take the next step and bring like potential impact to the business outcomes. So all in all, like as a part of your strategy, with all this awareness and insights and dashboard, you're trying to bring a culture of balance between optimization and innovation and performance. So as an enterprise, you want to keep trying new things, you want to bring in new initiatives, but you have to have an alignment of these initiatives with the business priorities. Every initiative, you have to allocate a cost and have a plan around it, so that when you're actually implementing, you are able to make decisions that balance your efficiency with your innovation. So at the end of it, it's all about like whatever cost you're spending, you are able to make value out of it. It is the best for the interest of the enterprise. And of course, you have to remember that saving costs is not the only thing we are thinking about here, because we have to think about growth, we have to think about innovation, but with the balance of cost. So with this strategy in place, we move on to looking at some of the um, mistakes to avoid when we are using AWS or any cloud for that matter. So yeah, so this summary slide I put forth to discuss with you some of the cases we came across and some of the common mistakes we see which happen during the cloud usage. So like trying out services and forgetting to delete. So this is like the most common. Now there are sometimes you just create, you think you will use it and you're not using, the resources are just lying unutilized. There are resources which get created in the background, like you don't really you don't know, if you're not aware of the complete infrastructure, you're just trying out something new and you would not know resources would get created in the background. For example, if you're trying the SageMaker MLOps pipeline, so that is one of the recent resources or services provided by AWS to automate the MLOps like entire pipeline. Now, when you're trying out that, you would see that as you launch your pipeline, there are multiple things which come up. There are many kernels which get opened. There are terminals which get opened. Then there are many new instances. So as we go through the model training and deploy the model into staging and production, so new instances, EC2 instances get created. The Jupyter notebooks where we test our model code and all, so those get saved into the file system. So all this is happening in the background. And if you're not aware of these things and you just do all this and then you close your browser and you leave, so be prepared for a surprise the next morning, because unless and until you actually explicitly shut down these resources, they will be charged on an hourly basis or depending on the type of resource. So that's the reason when you're taking up something, you have to be sure of how the pricing works. Oversizing instances. So this is another thing, like sometimes we tend to overestimate the load and size our instances according to that. But then it happens it happens the other way also. So you have to keep a tab on your utilization, and then you can increase or downsize your instance based on the utilization. Again here, suppose if you have to be careful with the reserved instance also, because if you end up buying a reserved instance, assuming your instance load, and you're locked in for that period now. So you can, there are ways you can reduce, you can sell, but then it's not direct, it's not straightforward. So always be sure of your consistent usage when you're going for a reserved instance. Also, the services, like as Scott mentioned, like expensive services like Redshift, if you just keep it running without any use, it'll be a huge overkill on the cost. It's like one of the most expensive services. So always pause them, or even if you are going to not use it for a long time, you can delete a Redshift cluster, take a snapshot. So when you come up next time, you can always rebuild your cluster from the snapshot. Now about the snapshots. So snapshots again are resources which we can just take a snapshot and forget about them. But again, they would incur costs. So you have to, if you're not using that snapshot, just delete it. So always pick up a service, understand its cost, understand all the background resources which are getting created, understand if there's any lock-in costs before getting into it. When you're considering like a complete cloud plan, think about all the different aspects of security, backup, archiving, like making use of the correct S3 storage type in order to have proper lifecycle policies and not like unnecessary pay for something which can be better utilized if you move it to a lower cost level of storage. When you're migrating from on-premise to cloud, again, there you have to be careful that you have to assess what you want to take into cloud, and you don't end up taking data or applications which are no longer needed, because all that would add to extra cost. So with all these in mind, you would be able to avoid any surprises and mistakes ending into cost on the cloud, unnecessary cost on the cloud. So yeah, so just to give an idea of the overall thought process on cloud financial management and the different services which are involved, which are provided by AWS in order to have a control on the cost, in order to have a visibility of the cost. So if you look at the different aspects, like in order to access your cost, you can use the billing dashboard. In order to look at the reports, you have the cost explorer. When you're purchasing something, you can make use of the free tier or the reserved instances, the spot instances. So in order to take benefit of the cost savings. When you want to organize and get a proper view of your cost, you would use cost categories and tags. You would want to right size your instances by using the compute optimizer, which will give you suggestions. Inspect, again, to inspect how your expenses are, you can look at cost explorer. For elasticity and scaling on the cloud, you would use Autoscaling as the most trusted service there. And you have the trusted advisor, which will provide suggestions on what better you can do on cloud. You have AWS budget to create budgets on cloud. And for control, you have AWS cost anomaly detection, which is like a relatively new service, which gives you any deviations or anomalies in your expenses. So overall, like these are the main services provided by AWS to keep a tab on your costs and be cost effective. So just to summarize with this slide, so we look at the main services or main tools for monitoring costs. So we have the AWS Cost Explorer, which helps visualize and manage your AWS costs and usage over time. So it gives you a complete view. It has multiple dashboards and reports wherein you can get details of your expenses. AWS cost and usage report. So this is like the next level, where if you want to get into details of a specific account and its users, it's like hourly and daily line items to that granular level. and if you have any tags associated, so the costs with the tags. So that level of metadata would be provided by the cost and usage report. Then you have the AWS budgets, where you can set up your budgets, how much you would want to spend on a monthly basis, for example. And you can have alerts whenever your budgets are exceeding, like even if it's a forecast budget or the real expense. So you can have different conditions which will act as an alert for you when you are actually exceeding the budget of your expenses. Also, you can set reservation utilization and targets and receive alerts when the utilization is dropping also. So if you want to keep a tab on whether your instances are being utilized properly, you can do that also through your budgets. Also, there is something called budget actions, wherein you can have the next level actions defined with respect to the IAM policies and the action, like the service control policies we spoke about earlier. So those can be linked to the budget behavior and budget action. Then we spoke about AWS Trusted Advisor. So this is a service which is like provided by the support plans. So as an enterprise, if you get into support plans with AWS, so it further helps you optimize your entire infrastructure, giving you suggestions on how you can improve your security, your performance on the different resources, and overall reduce your costs. The migration evaluator, this is another very useful, and this is a complementary service provided by AWS when you're deciding to migrate from on-premise to cloud. So this is one tool which you can use to put all your requirements on the cloud and then get an estimation of the total cost of ownership, the cost modeling analysis, so that it'll give you like what will be the ideal future state on AWS and what will be the estimated cost. So it makes it helps you decide what you want to take to cloud and what would be more effective staying back on-prem. AWS Application Cost Profiler. So this is a tool which helps you track the consumption of shared AWS resources. So basically in a multi-tenant kind of application where you can take the benefit of economies of scale, like have multiple tenants use the same applications, but then still have like a separate tracking of the consumption based on the tenant. So this is a tool useful in those scenarios where you're using a multi-tenant kind of architecture. Next, coming to the AWS Compute Optimizer. So this is another like useful tool which will give you recommendations. So it will tell you if you're using certain instances which are like underutilized, or maybe some database which is not being used, or something which can be downsized. So those kind of recommendations this will provide based on your workload, like how your performance has been in the last say 3 months. So based on that, it will give you recommendations. And the last one, which is like the most common, all of us have seen this, to pay our AWS bills, to monitor the usage, and even this consolidated billing in AWS billing gives you a detailed view of what are the resources, what are the different costs which are coming from these resources. It gives you a view of the free tier also, like what are the services which you have exhausted in the free tier, or which you are still using, which you are still like you have the scope of using in the free tier. So, so these are some of the most common like cost management services provided by AWS, using which you can keep a control on your costs, and you can actually have a view of where your expenses are, where you can save, and where you are doing a good job and where you need improvement. So with this, we come to an end of this session. So we are open for any questions.
Thank you, Abhilasha. I think we have had a few questions and I can see Scott is still answering them. We've already have had at least half a dozen of these. All right, so we still have a few minutes on hand. If there are any questions, please leave them in the Q&A box. I'd be more happy to get back to you on those. Any of these questions, Scott and Abhilasha, you would like to elaborate on a little bit, or?
Let's see. Well, I think some of them were really around, different aspects of it, like the scalability question that was out there about how, does scalability have anything to do with cloud cost optimization? And definitely does, in that, scalability is just going to give you a way to shrink and grow. So it also impacts a couple of those pillars we mentioned right in the well-architected framework. It's not only saving on cost, but it's also helping your performance too, right? So you don't have situations when you're auto-scaling where you're going to bring down a system. You're just going to grow the system. And then once that busy period's over, you just automatically shrink it, and that helps save on the cost. And some of and there was another question about hidden costs, and there are hidden costs in there, right? I mean, goodness, if you had to go out and manage all these resources, or if you had to manually go out and try to scale your resources outside of a scaling group, for example, I mean, that's big, right? Because then you've got operational costs that are out there as well. And that's the other thing, right? That's why we mentioned that well-architected framework. I think as you go along, and especially if you read that initial white paper, it was really good because it talked about looking at things as a whole. So cost is an aspect, but there's really, to have a well-architected system, all those different pillars are important to look at. Everything from operational cost, security, reliability, and performance, and the operations, the security and operations. They all play a part in it, and they all kind of bleed over a little bit into one another. So, and there was a question about security too. I'll just elaborate on that just a little bit. No real intent on providing, how security really impacts the cost. I think the unhidden things there, right, or a non-secure environment, kind of like what I mentioned in the best practices about monitoring, right? Monitoring that cost is just another way to be able to look at it and to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Hopefully you would look at something else though, right? So there's other ways to monitor when a new resource gets provisioned. You can set up notifications for that, and then also you can kind of automate your provisioning too, and that always helps. To know that, hey, the only way we can really provision anything is through this method, right? We can't do it, and we don't access the console to do a lot of those things. And I know that's hard to think about, but accessing a console from a security standpoint, if you can do it through a CLI is a great way to do it too. So. I think those well-architected that framework principles that are out there and that AWS has out there are really, really good principles. So if you haven't looked at that, take a look at it. And hey, we're here to help too. So just contact us at WalkingTree, and we can look at it. And yep.
We have just one last question for the day from Adi. Do we have an accelerator that puts together an assessment for clients?
Abhilasha, you can let me know if I'm wrong, but I don't think we currently have an accelerator, but that is definitely something that we're looking at for sure within WalkingTree, is to develop an accelerator that we use to provide those assessments. So we don't have it, but we are looking to do that. So that's actually on my roadmap.
All right. Thank you for that, Scott, and thank you, Abhilasha. I think that is all the time we have for today. If you still have any questions, you can always reach out to us on our ID, connect@walkingtree.tech. We'd be most happy to get back to you, and we look forward to your participation in the forthcoming webinars. We will definitely be having more on AWS. There will be a small survey right after this session ends, which will be taking a little bit of your feedback about this session and any other topics related to cloud or AWS you would want us to speak more on. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again.